So I was able to remove the text block successfully from this working board. I've actually got it just out of screenshot here, so we'll come to that in just a moment. But I thought it was worthwhile just asking, okay, let's just have some lessons learned and just think about how we would do this differently in the future, because the process of getting the individual loops of thread off of these little metal spikes that I had arranged here was just really tortuous, and it just really wasn't worth it. So I think that we need to think about a different method. So this is what I've come up with for the future. My plan would be to still use a working bench like this, and I'd still drill the holes in exactly the way that I've done here. But instead of putting these metal spikes up, instead what I would do is put some supports either side, like this. This will do as well, just like this. And I would thread the hole with some of the twine that I'm actually going to use ultimately as the core of the raised bands and to attach the boards. I would put a loose knot, I'll show that quickly here, just put a loose knot underneath so that you don't pull the whole thing through accidentally. And then what I would do is put a shim, or another board in other words, across the top, and I would drill the same holes through this shim that I'm doing through the baseboard. So in effect, when I'm doing the drilling, I'd probably be drilling through both at exactly the same time. Then I know that I'm dealing with exactly the same holes. Then what I would do is thread the twine through the top holes and then clamp this strongly. So what in effect I'm going to end up with are six, I'll tilt it here, six of these, or however many across. So in effect you create a loom of sorts. And what that enables me to do then is to work to construct the text block from the back forward. And I omit this step of then having to remove the text box from these metal spikes. Now, there are some trade-offs. Once you thread a loop around this string, you're basically committed at that point. These little spikes do have the advantage of being relatively slippery, so if you make a mistake, you can take a couple of loops off, put them back on. It's not a big deal. Whereas this thing will obviously have, it'll be tied through the top wood here. So I think that's the recipe from a less stressful episode the next time that I do this. So that's for me the big lesson learned there. Now, that all being said, we were successful in what we intended to do. We did get the text block removed, and then what I did was I had thought about reinforcing and creating like formal headbands and tail bands, structural headbands and tail bands here at top and bottom, but I decided in the end that probably wasn't necessary. So I've got my fabric, and I'm just pulling through the last of these threads here, like so. Come on. So, as you'll have seen from other books I've restored at this point, the fabric I always just put on very sort of loosely, because it's all going to need to bed down around the threads to just create, nice and flat. The fabric itself isn't actually, contributing anything to the, it's the attachment of the boards, the work will be done by these strings. It will not be done by the fabric. The fabric's just there just to keep the text blocks separate from the wet leather when we actually add the spine ultimately, as well as, you know, just helping to add to the overall structure of the text block. So there we go. So what I'm now going to do is slather on yet another helping of the glue, which, there we go. And then once this dries, we really will have a rigid text block structure at that point. There we go. And what this just does is it really reduces to a minimum the risk of text block itself unraveling if we ever have a problem with any of the threads from the sewing we did. You know, even if a thread were to fray or break, or if there's a loop that I didn't thread properly or whatever, it's going to be so sort of bedded down with the glue and the fabric and that it really isn't going to be in a position to cause significant trouble. Again, you can see why I say, you know, only put the fabric on loosely, because we want it to settle right down to create nice compartments between the raised bands. And if there's intention in the fabric, it's not going to do that. It's going to want to stay upright. Okay. So I'm going to leave that to dry. Just while that's sort of working, we're going to have a think about how we're going to actually put a nice binding on this book. And what I think I'm going to do is, I've come across, this is a binder's copy of an 1800s printing of the history of Great Britain. This cover's almost coming off. This has come off. But what I love about it is the leather. It really looks beautiful. And the other thing about this is it's thin. With a lot of the other books I've restored that are smaller in sort of dimensions, I've been able to use the thick boards from my sort of big collection of bindings because the books themselves have been thick. So it sort of looked appropriate to have thick boards, thick book. But this is such a small book that I don't want to sort of overdo it with sort of massive boards. And these are just really nice and thin, and they happen to be exactly the right dimensions for what I'm looking for here. So my plan is to use these two boards. It means, unfortunately, this book will come to its end of life, but it's kind of done for anyway, really. But we're going to use these boards together with a nice piece of leather, which will probably end up being something off of this to actually fashion the spine. So I think that'll end up looking quite nice. This is quite a flexible piece of leather. The alternative is to use some of the offcuts from other restorations I've done, which would be this kind of leather, which would be an option as well. But I'm kind of tempted to use this. I think we'll lose, when we wet this and bed it down, we'll hopefully lose quite a bit of the sort of bobbling there, and it'll be quite a nice smooth leather. But I do like these boards. So that's the plan. So we're gonna let this guy dry, and then we'll do a reasonably rapid canter through the final steps of restoration because they've been covered in sort of many videos posted to date.